a necessity, but to eat intelligently is an art. Good morning, everyone. I am Tamina Soji, student of MBA in Hospital and Healthcare Management, Symbiosis Institute of Health Sciences, Symbiosis International University, will be the host for this session. Welcome to SYMHEALTH 2023. SYMHEALTH, the annual mega event with a legacy of 25 years, attracts over 1,200 delegates from all over healthcare verticals such as doctors, medico-legal experts, insurance experts, IT professionals, NGOs, hospital administrators, and clinical research professionals from all over India and abroad. The pre-conference symposium is a part of SYMHEALTH 2023, and this addresses contemporary topics in the field of nutrition and dietetics. Let's begin with the first session of the pre-conference symposium on the topic Nutrition and Dietetics, Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. This session will focus on the evolution of nutrition in India, its current state, and potential future opportunities. We will be unraveling the diverse roles of nutrition in preventing and managing diseases, advancements in food composition tables, revolutionary contributions of the National Institute of Nutrition in India to boosting nutrition, and the latest efforts by nutritionists in mitigating disease risk. To conduct this very first session, we have amongst us Dr. Prashanth Thankachan. I request Sir to come to the stage. Sir is an associate professor in the Division of Nutrition at St. John's Research Institute and holds a PhD from St. John's Medical College in Bangalore. He is also a nutritional physiologist at the institute. He previously served as a research scientist and head of the micronutrient unit division of nutrition at the institute, as well as adjunct faculty in the division of epidemiology. He has been trained at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology at Zurich, Switzerland. He is currently involved in several projects, including developing fortified rice and KMC sensors for neonates under associations such as Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It is indeed our pleasure to have you amongst us, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the exact answer. But you open any modern textbook of nutrition, it'll say that although nutrition is a composite science which borrows heavily from the fields of medicine, biochemistry, anat, and physiology, it is a very young science for modern, in modern parlance, it's a very young science of just over 100 years old. But when I started reading about this topic, I asked myself, from the day mankind existed, or life forms existed, food had to be consumed. And I'm sure there were processes, thinking, and prescriptions put by ancient people, and that must be out there somewhere. So I couldn't believe that nutrition was just about 100 years old. So the word nutrition itself is originating from Latin, which means to nourish, and diet also originates historically to provide a way of life. So when you say dietetics, it's using the science of nutrition to impact the way of life through food. So that was the definition with which I started this process of thinking as to what am I going to talk without any data or without any tables or graphs, because I was often used to handling scientific data and presenting the findings of that data. So using this definition, when I looked back into literature, I found there was a huge amount of information starting from Ayurvedic sciences, where description of food that was consumed by people, when it should be consumed, how it should be consumed, in what forms it needs to be consumed, in which season it needs to be consumed, and so on and so forth. It was so widely described that it was beyond my capacity to even go into the depth of those literature. But evidence is there that in our own classical texts, food has been elaborately described, and so probably the birth of this nutrition probably happened there, but it was not called as nutrition. In fact, there are detailed guidelines as to what one should eat. And if you eat a certain type of food, how it affects your mood and well-being. It's all been described there. So nutrition probably began in those days and it evolved over time. If you look at beyond the Ayurvedic classical texts, you can look at the Egyptian textbooks of medicine, the Chinese textbooks of medicine. There is description of food being part of several remedies for diseases, and honey, for example, is used in over 500 remedies in the Egyptian times. The ancient Greeks had their own methodologies of food descriptions for various diseases and deficiencies and disorders. The famous mathematician, how many of you all still remember the Pythagoras theorem? Ah, nice. Do you know what it is? But the famous Pythagoras, the guy who gave out the Pythagoras theorem also had a say in what food is and how food really affected the well-being of individuals. You go on to look at ancient Greeks, Hippocrates, and also if you look into the book of Daniel in the Bible, there is probably the evidence of the first sort of a comparative trial done where there is a comparison between a vegetarian diet and a non-vegetarian royal diet. So it's probably the historical evidence of people knew what food could do to one's health and life. So these are some of the, just for historical perspectives, I've pulled out some of their images, and the first mention of nutrition in the real context came from this Greek philosopher who said the body absorbed food and provided with homomerics, that is the generative components for us to grow and live life. So the nutrition word itself probably evolved from there, and Hippocrates, who's considered the father of modern medicine, gave the notion of diet and a regimen. So when you talk of dietetics, probably it began there. And all of you must have heard of the famous artist. He too said the body, the food is, the metabolism is like a burning candle. Then they didn't know what metabolism is really doing, the biochemical reactions and things like that, but he compared the metabolism occurring in the body to that of a burning candle. And in 1770, Lavoisier demonstrated that the heat produced from the body is equivalent to that of a combustion engine. So he said food is a fuel in human beings. Similarly, just like how when you burn fuel in a combustion engine, you produce carbon dioxide, you must be producing carbon dioxide from your body as well. So he was the first guy to actually devise equipment to measure nutritional processes. And so this was the first nutrition-related equipment that was built to actually measure, after you eat a certain type of food, what is it that you produced in your breath. So this is from literature which shows that he is probably considered as one of the first ones to design equipment to study nutrition. Today we have a host of equipment, from bod machines to bioimpedance machines to DEXAs and potassium counters and so on and so forth. But in the early days, he was the pioneer in thinking of measuring what happens to food after you consume it. So the growth of nutrition over the many centuries was directly influenced by the diseases that were around that time. And most of the diseases at that time were because of deficiency states. I'm sure all of you have heard of these diseases, but may not have seen any of these diseases now. Have any of you seen these diseases now? Very rarely. But in those days, it was quite rampant, and a lot of people died to these diseases. And they didn't know what was the cause of these diseases, or they didn't even know that there was a deficiency of a certain vitamin. The word vitamin didn't exist then. But so the entire science of nutrition was trying to evolve by trying to find solutions for these four diseases. So, so vitamin D, thiamine, niacin, and vitamin C, these caused these four deficiencies, but only for scurvy, unknowingly the sailor found that eating citrus fruits prevented scurvy occurring. But then he didn't know that it was vitamin C that is causing the deficiency to disappear. So if you look at decades and decades that have gone by, several discoveries occurred in that 150 years where a lot of vitamins were discovered. The synthesis of vitamins and molecular and characterization of those vitamins occurred, leading to a better understanding. And probably the last hormone that was discovered around 2000 is ghrelin, and the hormone obistatin. So evolution of nutrition began from deficiency disorders. And the research was also focused to see whether people could find ways of overcoming those kind of deficiencies. Over the years, as these deficiencies were occurring, the world also were facing a lot of issues. There was war, there was famine, there was a lot of things that was influencing directly or indirectly the evolution of nutrition. So if you look at the early 70s, there was a huge shortage of food, at least in India. We had no food to eat, while some parts of the developed world had food to eat, but they didn't have quality food to eat. So systems and processes were spent in the developed world trying to increase the productivity. And that was the time when high-yielding varieties of grains were produced. But science had not evolved then to look at whether those high-yielding varieties, are they really nutrient-dense to the mankind for the next several generations. Today we know that some of the high-yielding varieties of wheat, when consumed, do cause increased gluten allergy and things like that. But then they didn't have that information. Then it was the question of preventing hunger. So evolution happened at that time. Even in India, there was an agricultural revolution so that everybody had food to eat at the end of several decades. And today we have reached a food security that is much better than it was before. So in the 1970s and that region, it was producing adequate food to eat. At the same time, in the 70s, many people thought that formula feeding of infants is better than breastfeeding of infants. Today, the whole science has changed. Today we say exclusive breastfeeding is much better than formula feed. But industry also played a role in that, to say that the formula feed has higher protein and therefore better for the child. In the research that continued from the 80s onwards, it was always trying to look at cause and effect. You take one particular variable and then you try and delete that variable, or you modify that variable and then look at your health outcomes. That was sort of a reductionistic approach. Even today we are doing the same thing. We have not yet come together like a holistic approach of Ayurveda, where we can look at an individual and then look everything around it. We take a group of people, may it be in the hospital setting or may it be in research setting. We take that group of people and generalize it to the population. And then we take one or two variables of study and then study it and try to link cause and effect. So that's sort of a reductionistic approach. And in the nutrition world, food doesn't interact with just one or two such variables. Food interacts with almost everything. Food interacts with your thought. Food interacts with how you feel. Food interacts with the physiology, biochemistry, and a whole lot of other things. There's a plethora of bacteria living on you. You interact with that. It interacts with your sleep. So it's not possible to tease out one element from the other. And most of us, each individual in this room is different. Human beings are so variable in different of any parameter you take, we are also variable. And yet, around the 80s and 90s, and even now, we generalized everything to a population. Okay, that is where, to some extent, the nutrition really, I wouldn't say fail, but nutrition doesn't give you the same outcome that we expect, because each of us are different. Going forward, in the 90s, we all became conscious a little bit about fat and sugars, and lifestyle diseases started increasing, and then we wanted to have a better food balance, and we were talking about cereals and grains, and all that concept about low carb, high carb, physical activity started coming in, and we started also getting into the information age with Facebook and social media. Today, most of us don't even read the textbook. We get the information from social media. Whether it's validated information or not, that's a different question. But we engage with social media so much that we have more than enough information coming from there. And no longer are textbooks and journals impacting what you're thinking. It's the influencers in those social media page that is influencing your habits. So we have come a long way from classical textbooks to literature to today we are looking at what the younger generation looks at. What does the influencer in the social media is eating? I would like to eat the same. Whether it's right or wrong is a different question. And finally, the future. Future is where we will change, or the nutrition and dietetics has to change from a population-centric approach to an individual-centric approach. That is where the next speaker after me will be talking about precision nutrition, which is also called as the personalized nutrition, which is not just one or two elements. It's almost, in a sense, after I researched for this topic, I'm quite certain that we are going back to the roots of Ayurveda. We are looking at a holistic approach in a modern lens, where we can start looking at not just one or two elements, but a host of elements. And if you take year on year, if you take every decade of the evolution of nutrition, something or the other has happened, and I will not go into this because I have left the slides here. Again, this is taken from a classical textbook, it's available, but different things occurred. For example, around the mid-1950s, fortification became a big thing in the world. But did we hear fortification in India around that time? No. Around that time, we didn't have food to eat. But today, fortification is a big thing in India. You will hear rice fortification happening everywhere, salt fortification. We're even talking of double fortified salt, which will be disseminated to everybody in order to reduce the burden of anemia in women and children, which is a huge burden in our country. The future involves looking at, as I said, various risk pathways in diets, bringing all of them together. Each of us, probably based on our culture, based on our lifestyle, harbor different types of microbiome within our body. We interact differently with them. So we have to bring all those data into the realm of dietetics, into the realm of nutrition, and then ask these questions. Now I'll shift slightly from the global scenario to an Indian scenario. The nutrition in India really started in a tiny little room in a place called Pasteur Institute in Kunur. Okay, that's where the nutrition was born probably, and at that place, Sir Robert was the one who was running a beriberi unit, because just like how the world was suffering from vitamin deficiencies, India too had a huge burden of vitamin deficiencies then. You could see the corneal bitot spots so easily everywhere. And so this little room where Sir Robert started this beriberi surveillance unit was what transformed later on in the 1950s to National Institute of Nutrition. That moved from Kunur to Hyderabad, which is now the headquarter under ICMR. And it set a vision to eliminate all forms of malnutrition in the country through scientific means. So that was the basis from a tiny room in Kunur where nutrition really emerged in the country. They have played significant roles in several landmark studies and policies in the country, not just nutrition deficiency surveillance and finding therapeutic approaches for that or food-based approaches for that. Your early recommendations for dietary intake started way back then, and also your analysis of food and food composition tables began very early on, and I think both the RDA and the EAR has been updated year on year, and today even the 2020 RDA and the EAR has come out, and happy to say that St. John's Research Institute played a pivotal role in defining those values and also the data required for those values. So I'll give you a glimpse of some of the landmark studies or programs that has been initiated in the country. Some of them are for anemia prevalence, high prevalence of anemia reduction. How many of you all have heard of the National Anemia Prophylaxis Program in the country? Yeah, it ran for several decades, and today it is also called as the NIPI program, and also called as a flagship program that's running today is the Anemia Mukt Bharat. So the roots of it emerged way back then from National Institute of Nutrition. And several other programs came out from that center, and including supplementation of iron and folic acid for pregnant mothers and school children also emerged from there. Have you all heard of the midday meals program? This is one of the largest midday meal program where school children receive one meal for lunch every day at school. And this is such an important piece of the food basket for the child, because the child gets this is probably for several children in the country, this is the only meal, okay? And the parents are busy, they're working in the fields, and many of them are so poor that they don't even get any other meal at school, at home. You'll be surprised to see the midday meal program also has a long history. It started way back in 1923 in the state of Tamil Nadu, and rest of the states just followed, and today across the country the midday meal program is delivered, and a huge number of children benefit from this midday meal program. During COVID, all of you know there was a stringent lockdown put. What happened to the midday meal program? It just stopped. What happened to the children? So we did a study in school children, and we were lucky to have blood samples just before COVID, and we took the same children post-COVID, and the anemia prevalence in the children doubled. So we just because COVID came, we pushed the children's burden of anemia to a double figure, and so it is important that these kind of protective public health measures should continue in the place of all sorts of emergencies, because for poor children, this is the only meal that is available. Have you heard of the ICDS program? There's another flagship program in the country, probably the largest public health initiative in any country to be run, and provides a lot of services to pregnant mothers and children. And this is also a part of the nutrition development within the country. So I'll now shift to research happening in nutrition, okay? And there are several groups in the country doing nutrition research in their own context and with their own problems and questions. And in our center, we have a division of nutrition which decided to go the isotopic way. We said, let's ask complex questions in nutrition which cannot be addressed in the classical way. So we embarked on this journey to use stable isotopes. Isotopes are compounds of the same element with a differing atomic mass. And you have two types of isotopes, radioisotopes and stable isotopes. Radioisotopes you use in treatment and other things, and stable isotopes are something that is absolutely safe. It can be used in everybody because it's already inside your body. Why would I say it's already inside your body? Because the food that you eat is grown on this earth, and the earth contains isotopes. It's there in the plant and animals that you eat, and therefore the isotopes are already in your body in a certain ratio, and which is a constant. So we use stable isotopes heavily in St. John's, and we have set up a facility there for doing complex nutritional studies, and it has helped in generating data on a vast variety of nutritional issues, including bioavailability of iron. Some of the RDA that you see today of how much iron you should consume, you will see a bioavailability percentage there. That came about by studies being done on this. Your body composition, how much fat is there in your body, how much minerals are there, how much water is there, is all done accurately using stable isotopes. So just to give you a brief on, I will not go into the techniques as such, but I'll give you a brief overview of how isotopes can be used. And so if I take iron, for example, an isotope of iron, you have so many different, all these are isotopes of iron, iron 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, and 60. It's present on the earth. Now 55 and 59 are radioisotopes. In other sense, they emit energy particle. In the early days, when stable isotope techniques were not available, nutrition used these radioisotopes to understand how much was the iron absorption in humans. But they could not use it in women and children, but they could do it in men. So the older absorption figures that we had were based on data generated in men, and you all know that the absorption profile and iron requirement is very different between men and women. So until 2007, till we got the data in women, we were relying on that earlier study which had data on men. So we took isotopes of iron 56, 57, and 58, and we can tag your food. All of you had breakfast this morning, I suppose, right? So if you have a question, what is the iron absorption from that breakfast, I could add on that meal an isotope of iron. And the body cannot differentiate whether it's an isotopic iron or it's a natural iron. And then I can track within the body how much is the absorption, how much is the utilization, and we can accurately get the values needed for that meal, what the bioavailability is. So this is your natural composition of the 4 isotopes in your body, that is 4, 54, 56, 57, and 58. 56 is the largest because it's the most abundant. And then you can add enriched tracers. You can buy these enriched tracers and add it into your meal, and you can change, based on the absorption coming from these two, you can change the enrichment. By understanding that enrichment, I will know how much is the absorption. So these were the kind of studies you can do to ask questions on iron bioavailability, mineral bioavailability, nutrient-nutrient interactions. You can tweak 2 nutrients for optimal absorption. You can ask how much is the water compartment in your body by using an isotope of water. You can look at calcium to understand whether your bone is absorbing calcium from your diet or not, but whether the bone is giving calcium. You can simply take a urine sample, and without even giving an isotope, your urine is excreting calcium depending on how your calcium status is. So just by looking at a passive urine sample, non-invasively, you can talk about mineral metabolism. So we went quite deep and extensive in isotopic work at St. John's. And so there's this little cartoon to say that you want to measure total water in the person. You give a person to drink a little bit of isotopic water or heavy water. And then after some time, that water goes in, gets absorbed, distributes in the entire water compartment. Then you take a sample and see how much is the dilution of the concentration you gave. And I will know what's the volume of my compartment. So we use these kind of techniques to answer important questions of what is the fluid expansion in different times in physiological times. Or I could give a test meal along with a tracer. It will undergo normal absorption and go to different pools within the body. And then I can look at, if I can sample those pools, I can then say what is the contribution within that pool for that particular tracer, and I can physiologically map those pathways. I can either add the tracer externally to the food that you're eating, or I can put it into the soil or give it to the animal, and then I'll have intrinsically labeled food. So again, this is a logic of how we can add the tracer to the meal, and your enrichment changes. Then you process the samples on a mass spec, and you will get the absorption or utilization as the case may be. So this is your body. The entire body has X amount of water. Okay, I'll finish. And you want to see how much is that pool. So I can calculate the volume based on dose and concentration. To do these, I'll skip this. So in effect, from birth to the grave, you can answer several questions based on isotopic approaches. But again, these are not looking at it holistically. It is again looking at it in a sort of an individualistic, reductionistic approach, which I think will change in the future. If any of you are interested in these techniques, all these techniques are published in the International Atomic Energy Agency's website, because we are a reference center for them. You can download all these techniques. It's in detail mentioned, and we have been part of these documents in creating them as well. Besides these kind of studies, the normal efficacy, effectiveness, biochemical studies we routinely do. But going forward, I think a human being interacts on all these domains, and food is central to all of them. We have to start collecting data in all these domains and then crunch that using the data that's going to come out of these is huge. It's not possible to be done manually. You have to figure out analytical tools, AI and other things to find patterns and other things to get your specific type of food that one needs to eat for a particular condition. So this is the future. I think the next speaker will elaborate on precision nutrition, so I will leave it there. And also we have to look at the individual, the society, and the infrastructure and the government policies and other things holistically to actually make a change. Many of the times as nutritionists and dietetics, we advise patients to increase their physical activity. But there's no park or no pathway available even for them to walk. So what are we talking about? So I think a lot of changes have to be done. And again, all these pathways have to feed into your plate. Earlier we were taking from the plate and then dividing it and seeing. We have to twist it on its, make it upside down and then take all these pathways and put it to the plate. And there will be a lot of hardware and software which nutrition people have to get used to. We will be in the era of wearables. All of you wear watches today. Soon there will be sensors for glucose monitoring and so on and so forth. And so as nutrition evolves, the faculty, students, and all of us need to evolve to understand how to handle this hardware and software, how to deal with this large set of data, and how to bring all this data into a meaningful entity that you can make a difference to the world. So with that, I'll stop, and thank you for your time. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, sir, so much for beginning this session with an impactful talk on nutrition and dietetics yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Now, the session is open for question and answers. I'm sure sir will be happy to take some questions from the audience.
My question is, sir, like in ancient time, the people, they don't follow any kind of diet and even the routine also. And even then they are so fit, workaholic, energetic. And nowadays we are following keto diet, intermittent, all that things. So how, how good is this, sir? What will you say on this point, sir?
Okay, so
Thank
first
you.
and foremost, the ancient people were not sitting in a chair and tapping into the phones and the computers. I think today we call what is sitting is the new smoking. Have you all heard about this? So the ancient people never sat like us, and we were not designed to sit and work on a computer and eat such high-calorie foods. So for the kind of work we do, we need to eat really, really small amount of foods because we are not burning any energy at all. We are only using our little bit of amount of energy for thinking, and that's about it. The ancient people's diet was so diverse. They ate unprocessed foods. They foraged for their food, and they had to really work hard to get that meal. And so physical activity was huge in them. They ate naturally available foods. No high carb, high sugar foods were there. So when you put all that into context, I think we have evolved in the wrong way. Not, I'm specific to the kind of food we are eating. I think there is an effort now to go back. You must have seen millets is gaining prominence because it is much more not refined, or it has more fiber and things like that. So I think the reason why we're seeing all these problems is because our food is not designed for us in the current way it is.
So in your talk, you are mentioning about vitamin D, B1, and vitamin C. But actually, in clinical practice, all these are there even now. And even vitamin C deficiency or scurvy, we call cardiac scurvy, is the reason for myocardial infarction. So especially when they look in the coronary artery microphotograph, they can see that when there is deficiency of vitamin C, you can see a lot of gutters and this thing where the cholesterol is getting accumulated. Second is vitamin D. Even now I have seen rickets, because people living in Middle East, they are not exposed to this, so you are seeing rickets even now. And thiamine, we have seen in my clinical practice, maybe after starting this, I have seen a lot of vernix encephalopathy which is coming as a vitamin. So it is again there, but only thing is maybe it is not reported.
Yeah. So in the earlier days, we had huge prevalence of these deficiencies. But today we don't see that huge prevalence. You see in isolated pockets in people who are living on certain diets or people who are not exposed to sunlight. You do see these deficiencies. But in the earlier days, it was almost everybody had these kind of issues. And the mortality from these were very large. That was the relative And also to comment on the vitamin C, today we cook and boil and do so much of heat exposure on our food. There's nothing remaining. Have you heard of the word rainbow on the plate in your... But when you cook that, there's nothing remaining.
Good morning, sir. I think you covered the past and the future very elaborately and nicely.
Thank you.
First and foremost, I should commend you on that. Second, I think the way you have explained that the nutrition will both become individualistic. So how these studies, what you are talking about in terms of studying the entire humans and applicability of it into the entire human population, how will it come out? And the second question is, I come from a culinary background. I had the School of Culinary Arts over here. Food is central to all of it. Yes. So, in fact, the way we eat, it describes what you are. So that's what we need to ensure. Yes. And as nutritionists individually, the culinary medicine aspect, how far it will go in terms of future?
So I'll try to split your question. So the first is, if you look at the current, there is no distinction between a population-based approach versus an individual-based approach. So what science you have for an individual is the same thing applied in a slightly different form for the population. But I think that will change, because you're already seeing dietitians sitting in clinics and looking at patient versus patient, and seeing what specific is the need for that patient. But there, the person is not applying an individual knowledge there. The person is applying a sort of a population-specific knowledge, what has been gained, onto that individual. Now, as I said, food interacts with a lot of things, and you interact as a person with a lot of things, like sleep, stress, your existing health status, your gut microbiome, and so on and so forth. So, I don't think it will happen very soon that everybody will have this kind of data. But more or less, at least the urban population today, you will see that there are a significant population that is tracking their physical activity. They're tracking how many calories they're burning. And they are getting conscious on what is their heart rate, and if they are physically active, is the heart rate coming down. So there is a population that is getting well informed and trying to do those kind of things. And I've also seen another subset of population who is very physically active, wanting to know what is their body composition. And they've even come to our centers asking, can you measure the fat in me? You know? So I think as information and knowledge starts improving, you will see a shift happening, but that will take time in India because we have other fundamental problems of, we need to reach food diversity first before precision nutrition. Today you go to rural India, there's no food there.
Absolutely.
And so our economic condition has to improve first, leading to a better diversity in the diet. And then would all these come. But it's good for the nutrition community and the food community to understand that these are the tomorrow that we have to face and get prepared for that.
So this brings to, I think, one more point of it, that the entire Indian knowledge system of Ayurveda was quite elaborate in identifying the whole aspects of personal nutrition, yes, and based on individual nutritions. Yeah. And
I didn't know that there was so much of
yes,
description.
because we practiced that Ayurvedic diet thing in
until I
school.
started digging into it, and
right,
probably this helped me get an understanding of it as well.
And again, as you said, in public health nutrition, you have a challenge of somebody who is deficient at the lower population level versus the urban population, which is now facing modern lifestyle diseases.
Yes. You have a double burden.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, sir.
There's one last question.
Okay, one last question.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for elaborating all this past and future. So as you rightly mentioned in social... Okay. As you rightly mentioned, in social media influencer, there are totally two schools of thought. Like 5 years back, we were saying breakfast is your most important meal, and now we are into again in an era where we are speaking about IF, intermittent fasting. So, do you really think like in future this IF is going to be our a living standard? As you mentioned, a diet is a living standard and not what just we eat. So. I would like to understand your take on this, sir.
Yes, so this is something that we've often discussed and deliberated. Most diets don't work, okay? Simply because human behavior is very hard to correct. You can correct the behavior in a child, but in an adult it's extremely difficult to change behavior. And diet and food are linked with human behavior. And you can go back and see whoever has done intermittent fasting, if the person is well motivated, 6 months, 1 year, they've held it on. But somewhere along the line after that, sustainability is a big issue and they're back to square one. And I've seen people who have got so aggressive into intermittent fasting, 3 months down the line, they have sort of come back, and in the process they've put on more fat than they had originally. So I think the key is you, as an individual, you eat what you want, what you like, but in moderation. And that moderation is something that you can tweak on your own way, and with some discipline you can make it sustainable. Most intermittent fasting, what I've seen, has not really worked in the long term. In the short term, yes, you can lose a lot of weight, whether it is fat loss or whether it is muscle loss, it's another debate. But in the short term you can see, but in the long term it is not sustainable. And I think the breakfast is not something that classical literature, even in Ayurveda, if you go, breakfast is an important part of your diet. But this social media and this influencing has led to breakfast being skipped, and you get a 24-hour or 12-hour or 16-hour. There's different kinds of regimens. All of them have not been proven on with data. It is all based on whatever people say. Some data is there.
Okay. With that, we'll be ending the Q&A session. Thank you so much, sir. Now, to felicitate sir, I invite Chef Atul Gokhale sir, Director, Symbiosis School of Culinary Arts, onto the stage.